something unusual just happened. Apple, the company that once seemed untouchable, just lost one of the most important legal battles in its entire history. A loss that could cost them billions. But what makes it stranger is who they lost to. Not another trillion-dollar tech rival, but a video game company. And somehow, this one defeat is just the beginning of a much bigger story. Because Apple isn't just facing one lawsuit, it's facing pressure on every side. Their stock has fallen nearly 20% since December. That's close to $1 trillion in market value. Gone. Once the crown jewel of the Magnificent Seven, Apple is now the weakest among them. How did one of the most successful companies in history end up like this? To understand, we have to go back to 2020 and to one small update in a game called Fortnite. The update that started a war. It was August 2020 when Epic Games quietly pushed a small update to Fortnite on iPhones. A new payment option appeared, one that let players buy directly from Epic outside of Apple's App Store, and at a 20% discount. Within hours, Apple banned Fortnite from the App Store entirely, but that was exactly what Epic wanted to happen. The moment Fortnite disappeared, Epic was ready. They filed a lawsuit against Apple the same day. This wasn't an accident, it was a calculated move. See, Apple takes a 30% cut from every purchase made through the App Store. That includes in-app items, subscriptions, or even upgrades. Developers aren't allowed to include links or buttons that lead users to outside payment options. It's Apple's rule, and it's extremely profitable. For years, companies like Spotify and Patreon had to charge more on iOS just to make up for Apple's cut. Epic's founder, Tim Sweeney, had been publicly criticizing this for years. He called Apple's control a monopoly, saying it was unfair and anti-competitive. So Epic decided to fight with what they called Project Liberty, a secret campaign that involved lawyers, PR firms, and a long-term plan to take Apple to court. When the update went live and Apple reacted, everything happened exactly as they expected. Apple removed Fortnite, and Epic began their legal war. The courtroom battle Epic's lawsuit was clear. They didn't want damages, they wanted change. Their goal was to break Apple's control over how apps make money, to open iPhones to fair competition. But when the first verdict arrived in 2021, the outcome was mixed. The judge ruled that Apple wasn't technically a monopoly, but Apple had violated California's unfair competition law by blocking developers from communicating about outside payment options. So Apple was ordered to change its rules. On paper, it looked like a win for Epic. In reality, Apple wasn't done fighting. Apple's compliance. After years of appeals, delays, and even attempts to push the case to the Supreme Court, Apple finally began to comply in 2024. But the compliance was questionable. Yes, developers could finally link to external payment options, but Apple introduced a new commission fee of 27%, plus a small processing fee on top. So while it looked like developers were getting freedom, in truth, the cost barely changed. It was Apple's way of obeying the law without giving up control. And then came the part everyone started calling the scare screens. Whenever users tried to pay outside Apple's system, they got a full-page warning that read, "You're about to leave Apple's secure environment. Apple isn't responsible for your privacy or security." Even if that external site was Spotify, Netflix, or Epic's own platform, Apple made it sound like a risk. It was psychological pressure designed to keep users inside Apple's ecosystem. Developers pushed back hard. Epic accused Apple of deliberately ignoring the spirit of the court's order, and the court agreed. The final blow. In a new ruling, Judge Yvonne Gonzalez-Rogers called Apple's new terms anti-competitive and deceptive. She noted that Apple's 30% cut had allowed it to earn super competitive margins, profit levels far above what was justified. Then came the shocker. Evidence showed that some Apple executives, including Vice President Alex Roman, had given misleading statements under oath. Internal messages revealed that senior staff, including marketing head Phil Schiller, had urged Tim Cook to comply properly. But Cook ignored them. The judge didn't just issue another fine. She referred Apple for potential criminal contempt. In simple terms, she believed Apple willfully defied the court. Epic's CEO, Tim Sweeney, celebrated immediately. He wrote, "Greater than the long national nightmare of the Apple tax is over." And just like that, the floodgates opened. Spotify, Patreon, Stripe. All began adding external payment options. And after nearly 4 years, Fortnite returned to the App Store. It was a massive shift. For the first time in years, Apple had been forced to change. But the victory came at a bad time for them. Because far beyond the courtroom, much bigger problems were waiting. Dependence on China. For years, Apple's global strength came from its manufacturing network in China. Over 95% of Apple's products are assembled there, in huge factories, employing millions of workers, mostly through Foxconn. When Apple first moved production to China in the early 2000s, the idea made perfect sense. Labor was cheap, supply chains were efficient, and China was eager to build everything Apple needed, even new airports and highways for them. But today, that system is starting to crack. Wages in China have more than doubled since 2013, and younger workers are far less willing to take repetitive factory jobs. At the same time, Chinese phone brands like Huawei, Vivo, and Xiaomi have caught up. They offer top-quality smartphones for much less money. In 2024, Apple's sales in China dropped by 18%, and their market share fell to just 15%, their lowest in almost a decade. The trade war problem. As if that wasn't enough, the US-China trade tensions reignited. New tariffs hit Chinese-made goods, some as high as 145%. And this time, Apple wasn't spared. A former Apple executive said bluntly, "This entire supply chain goes back to one man, Tim Cook. He built it. And now, it's his biggest vulnerability." Add to that China's tightening control over foreign companies, requiring data from Chinese users to stay in China, and even forcing companies to include government-approved board members. Apple suddenly found itself trapped in a system it no longer controlled. The shift to India. Cook's solution has been to slowly move Apple's manufacturing to India. It's been in progress for years, but only recently started to show results. By 2024, about 14% of iPhones were made there. A big step, but still far from replacing China. Analysts predict that while India may match China's production volume within 5 years, it could take over a decade to match its revenue contribution. In short, this transition will be slow and expensive. Apple's innovation stalls. And while Apple fights legal and global battles, its core product, the iPhone, isn't helping much. Upgrades have become smaller, and innovation feels slower. Their recent Apple Intelligence launch, meant to bring AI to their devices, received mixed reviews. Critics said it was rushed, confusing, and limited compared to what Google and OpenAI are doing. For a company that built its empire on design and innovation, this is a worrying sign. The bigger picture. Apple is still enormous, but its image as the flawless, unstoppable company is fading. They've lost in court. Their supply chain is under pressure. Competition is rising, and innovation feels slower than ever. For decades, Apple defined the future of technology, but now, the company that once changed the world is suddenly the one trying to catch up. Maybe this isn't the fall of Apple, but it's definitely the first time in years that the world is seeing cracks in its perfect shell.